All right, let's dive into The Anxious Generation, a book that takes a look at this, rising anxiety and depression we're seeing in Gen Z, those born after 1995.
Yeah.
And it's kind of wild, right? Because the book highlights this massive spike in mental health issues that seems to have started in the early 2010s.
Hmm.
And the author is pointing a finger at something I think we all kind of suspect: smartphones and social media.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is it just a coincidence, or is there a real connection between all this new tech and how young people are feeling?
Right. Like, is this the price we're paying for all this connectivity?
Yeah, and the book actually uses this really interesting comparison. It likens the online world to raising kids on Mars.
Mars.
Yeah, like think about it. Both environments are kind of harsh, super unforgiving. One small mistake, one little slip up, and it can have these huge consequences that just follow you around forever.
I see what you mean. Like, post something dumb online and it's there forever. It's like this permanent record that can come back to haunt you. No wonder kids are stressed out.
Exactly. And Haidt, the author, he argues that this constant pressure, it basically puts kids in this constant fight or flight mode.
Oh, like their survival instincts are on high alert all the time.
Exactly. They're hyper aware of everything they do, everything they say online, because they know that one wrong move could have these lasting repercussions.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. And he calls this shift the great rewiring of childhood. It's like we've gone from this childhood where you played outside, scraped your knees, had face-to-face interactions.
Yeah, made mistakes and learned from them.
Right, exactly. To this childhood where you're basically plugged in all the time, constantly navigating this complex digital world.
And there's actually a ton of data to back this up. Like, check out this graph.
Oh, wow.
It shows this dramatic rise in major depressive episodes in teens, and it starts right around 2012, right when smartphones and social media were really taking off.
The timing's pretty striking.
Yeah, and it's not just a gradual increase, it's like a hockey stick straight up, especially for girls.
Hmm.
By 2020, 1 in 4 American teen girls said they'd had a major depressive episode in the past year.
That's a really alarming statistic.
It is, right? It's really heavy stuff. Now, some people might argue that maybe it's not the technology itself. Maybe Gen Z is just more open about mental health than previous generations, right?
Yeah, there's definitely more awareness these days.
Right, but the increase in serious cases, like, suicide of thoughts, hospitalizations, that kind of stuff, it suggests that something much deeper is going on.
I see what you mean. It's not just about talking about it more. It's about a real increase in suffering.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what about the argument that that Gen Z is anxious because the world is kind of a scary place right now. Climate change, political polarization, all that.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
I mean, that stuff keeps me up at night.
It's definitely a lot to process. But here's the thing. Historically, when there's like a shared threat, a big scary thing that everyone's facing, people tend to come together. They rally, they support each other.
Oh, interesting. Like, you think about wartime, right? Communities band together.
Exactly. But with Gen Z, we're seeing the opposite. They're actually more isolated than previous generations, which, kind of brings us back to that whole Mars analogy.
Right, right. It's like they're each on their own little planet dealing with all this stuff alone.
Yeah. And Hyde actually makes this point about social media specifically. He says that those interactions, they lack something really important for development, something called attunement.
Attunement. I'm not familiar with that term.
Yeah, it's basically that back and forth you get in real-life conversations. Like, think about a parent mirroring their baby's facial expressions.
Oh, okay.
It helps kids learn how to read social cues, develop empathy, all these good stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
But social media, it's mostly asynchronous, right? You post something, and then you wait, sometimes forever, for a response.
It's like you're constantly seeking validation, but rarely getting that genuine, like, in-the-moment connection.
Exactly. And it's not just about feeling good. It actually impacts brain development.
Oh, really? How so?
You know how, like, there are certain periods when our brains are primed for learning specific things, like language is easiest to learn before puberty.
Right.
Well, Haidt says there are similar sensitive periods for social and emotional development.
So smartphones are messing with these crucial developmental stages.
Exactly. Imagine a kid's brain ready to learn about social interaction, but instead they're bombarded with adult content on social media. It's like getting them the wrong textbook at the worst possible time.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. So basically, smartphones are disrupting these sensitive periods, which leads to all sorts of problems.
Right. And in the book, Haidt outlines 4 specific harms. He calls them the 4 foundational harms that come with a childhood glued to a phone.
Okay, 4 foundational harms. Let's hear them. What's the first one?
The first one is social deprivation. And, we've kind of touched on this already with the whole Mars thing, but He really dives deep into.
Right, into how that lack of real-world interaction actually impacts kids.
Yeah, exactly. He compares the richness of, real-world play, where kids are physically present, laughing, problem-solving together, to the shallowness of online connections.
It's like no matter how many followers you have, it can't replace that actual feeling of being with your friends, laughing, sharing experiences in person.
Exactly. And this lack of genuine connection, it can lead to, to loneliness, isolation, which, as we've discussed, are major drivers of anxiety and depression.
Okay, so social deprivation, harm number one. What's next?
Sleep deprivation?
Ah, yeah, the dreaded blue light.
Yeah. Most of us know that scrolling before bed isn't great, but we tend to underestimate just how badly it messes with our sleep.
I am so guilty of that. I swear I'm going to put my phone down an hour before bed, and then suddenly it's 2 a.m. and I'm like deep in a TikTok rabbit hole.
Haha, we've all been there.
But how exactly does a lack of sleep mess with our mental health?
Well, even just a little bit of sleep deprivation can lead to mood swings, irritability, trouble focusing,
Oh, yeah.
and, you guessed it, more anxiety.
So it's like this vicious cycle, right? The more anxious you are, the worse you sleep, and then the worse you sleep.
Exactly. It just spirals. And the crazy thing is, even just 2 weeks of cutting back on late night screen time can make a huge difference.
Seriously, just 2 weeks.
Yep. People report better sleep, better mood, better focus. It's pretty amazing.
Okay, I'm convinced. I'm officially putting my phone down earlier, starting tonight.
Good for you.
So that's 2 harms down, 2 to go. What's the third one?
Attention fragmentation. Remember those pesky notifications we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah, those little dopamine hits designed to pull us back in.
Exactly. They're constantly interrupting our flow, making it hard to focus. And this constant distraction, it can actually change how our brains develop.
Wait, really? So our smartphones are literally rewiring our brains?
In a way, yes. Think of attention like driving on a highway. You have to stay on track, resist all those tempting exits.
And those notifications are like those flashing signs, trying to lure you off the road?
Exactly. And that's where executive function comes in. It's like the brain's control center for planning, decision-making, self-control, all that.
So executive function helps us resist the urge to check our phones every 5 seconds.
Right. But smartphones, with their endless notifications and that infinite scroll, they make it so hard to develop that kind of sustained attention.
So we're basically training our brains for instant gratification instead of, that deep focus and effort that we need to actually get stuff done.
You got it? And that brings us to the fourth harm, the one that's perhaps most worrying. Addiction.
Okay, addiction. We hear that word thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean when we're talking about smartphones?
It all boils down to dopamine, that neurotransmitter that's linked to pleasure and motivation.
Right, the feel-good chemical.
Exactly. And social media companies, they're masters at exploiting our dopamine systems. Like, imagine a teenager posting a selfie on Instagram and then immediately refreshing the page, hoping for likes.
Yeah, I see that all the time.
Every notification, every like, it triggers a little dopamine rush.
Oh, so they keep checking, keep refreshing, hoping for more of that good feeling.
Exactly. And the more they check, the stronger that behavior becomes. It's like a slot machine, You might not win every time, but the possibility of winning keeps you coming back for more.
And in this case, the win is that feeling of, being liked, being accepted, feeling like you belong.
Right. And what's even more concerning is that the Facebook files, those internal documents that were leaked a while back, they showed that Facebook actually knew about these addictive mechanisms.
Oh, wow. So they were knowingly designing these platforms to be addictive.
It seems that way. And one of the documents was actually this presentation on the teenage brain. And it basically highlighted the fact that the frontal cortex in teenagers, it's still developing.
Which means they're more susceptible to these addictive designs.
Exactly. It's not just about willpower. Their brains are literally wired to be more vulnerable to this stuff.
That's kind of terrifying.
It is. And it makes it even more important that we understand how these technologies are affecting us and that we take steps to mitigate those harms.
Okay, so we've talked about the Great Rewiring, this whole Mars analogy, and those 4 harms of a childhood spent on phones. But haven't girls been hit harder by all of this than boys?
Yeah, that's what the data shows. While both boys and girls are definitely affected by, the rise of smartphones and social media, girls seem to be experiencing a more intense impact. And in different ways, too.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, for starters, think about the pressure to conform to beauty standards.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely amplified online.
Right. Algorithms often prioritize images that fit this very narrow definition of beauty. And that constant comparison with these carefully curated online personas, it can really mess with a young girl's self-esteem.
It's like a never-ending beauty contest, but it's playing out 24/7 on their phones.
Exactly. And for girls who are already struggling with, body image issues, Social media can be a real breeding ground for anxiety and depression.
Okay, so beauty standards and social comparison play a big role. What else is going on?
Girls are also more likely to be targets of online harassment and exploitation.
Ah, right, cyberbullying, all that stuff.
Yeah, things like cyberbullying, sexual harassment, even, the non-consensual sharing of explicit images.
Ah, it's just awful. It's like all of the worst parts of high school drama, but amplified and broadcast to the entire world.
Right, and it can be really hard to escape.
Okay, so girls are dealing with some pretty intense challenges online, but I'm guessing boys aren't exactly immune to the harms of this whole great rewiring.
You're right, they're not. And the research shows that boys have actually been experiencing a long-term decline in a bunch of areas like educational outcomes, engagement in real-world activities, and overall well-being.
So it's like a slower burn for boys, but the consequences are just as serious.
Exactly.
What are some of the specific challenges they're facing?
Well, one alarming trend is the rise of something called hikikomori.
Hikikomori, what's that?
It's a Japanese term for social withdrawal. These are young men who isolate themselves, often for years, in their rooms. They retreat into the digital world and basically avoid all real-life relationships and responsibilities.
Wait, is this more than just that stereotype of, gamers living in their parents' basements? Like, is this a real thing?
It's a real phenomenon, and it's becoming more and more common, even in Western countries.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that serious.
It is, and it highlights a key difference between how boys and girls tend to use technology.
Oh, how so?
Girls are often drawn to platforms that emphasize, connection and self-presentation like social media.
Right, right.
But boys are more likely to get really into video games and online forums that offer this sense of, mastery, achievement, and escape.
So while girls are wrestling with the pressure to fit in and be seen, boys are struggling to find their place, maybe even opting out altogether.
Yeah, and that can have a huge impact on their development, on their ability to form relationships, pursue their passions, all that stuff that makes life meaningful.
Wow, so we've got a generation of girls struggling with anxiety and depression, and a generation of boys withdrawing from the real world, becoming more and more isolated and disengaged.
It's definitely a cause for concern.
So the big question is, what can we do about it? Is it even possible to, reverse these trends?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll be tackling in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
All right, can't wait to hear more about that. Okay, so last time we went and left off on a bit of a cliffhanger, right? We took about all the problems, rising anxiety, the whole Mars analogy, the harms of smartphone addiction, but we didn't really get to the solutions. Like, is there anything we can actually do about this? Or is it like a lost cause?
Well, Haidt's actually pretty optimistic. He believes we can turn things around, but it's not going to be easy.
Okay, so not a lost cause, but definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and he's really clear that it's going to take a village. Parents, schools, governments, tech companies, everyone needs to be on board to create a healthier environment for kids.
All right, so a massive group effort. It sounds ambitious. Where do we even start?
Well, he suggests that governments really need to step up and start protecting children from the dangers of the digital world, just like they protect them from, dangerous products in the real world.
That's a good point. Like, we have all these regulations for, car seats and bike helmets and stuff, but when it comes to the internet, it's like anything goes.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting ideas he proposes is raising the age of internet adulthood.
Wait, hold on. Age of internet adulthood. What does that even mean?
So right now, in the U.S., kids can legally sign contracts with online companies at 13.
13, seriously?
Yep, which means they're basically giving away their data, agreeing to all these terms and conditions that, well, let's be honest, they probably don't even understand.
Yeah, a 13-year-old is not exactly making informed decisions about, their online privacy.
Exactly. So Haidt argues that this age should be raised to 16, more in line with other milestones like getting a driver's license.
Okay, so no social media, no, potentially harmful stuff online until they're 16. That actually makes a lot of sense.
It would give kids more time to, develop their social and emotional skills in the real world without all the distractions and pressures of the online world.
Yeah, it's like giving their brains a chance to catch up before they're thrown into the social media frenzy.
Exactly. And it would also give parents more control over their kids' online activity. It wouldn't all fall on them to be the bad guys.
Right. It shifts some of the responsibility back to the tech companies to actually enforce these age restrictions.
Exactly. But raising the age of consent is just one piece of the puzzle. Haidt also argues for stricter regulations to deal with the well, with the addictive designs of social media platforms.
Yeah, we talked about those dopamine-driven reward cycles earlier. It's like these apps are designed to keep us hooked, scrolling forever.
And that's especially dangerous for kids whose brains are, still developing and are more susceptible to those addictive patterns.
So what can governments do to stop, like, these manipulative tactics?
Well, they can pass laws that require tech companies to design their platforms with kids' well-being in mind.
Like, put some safeguards in place?
Exactly. Some places are already doing this. Like the UK has something called the Age-Appropriate Design Code.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. What does that code actually do?
So it basically sets standards for any online service that kids might use, websites, apps, games, all that. It includes things like limiting data collection, turning off autoplay features, making the interfaces easier for kids to understand.
So it's about making the online world safer and more transparent for kids, putting their well-being ahead of, profit.
Exactly. And some U.S. states, like California, are starting to do similar things with their own laws.
Okay, so governments need to set some boundaries, raise the age of internet adulthood, and regulate the tech industry to protect kids. What about schools? I mean, they're dealing with this stuff firsthand every day. What can they do?
Head's solution is actually pretty simple. Get the phone out of schools. He wants schools to be phone-free zones.
Whoa, that's a bold move.
Yeah, I can imagine some pushback from both kids and parents on that one.
Yeah, for sure. But I can also see the benefits. It's pretty hard to focus on schoolwork when you're constantly checking your phone, right?
Exactly. And teachers already have so much on their plate. Trying to, manage student behavior and keep them engaged is hard enough without adding smartphones to the mix.
Right. So going phone-free creates a more focused learning environment for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, but what about emergencies? Don't parents need to be able to, reach their kids at school?
Of course, but schools could easily, provide landlines or set up specific communication channels for urgent messages.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does a phone-free policy actually help with the bigger problem, the mental health crisis we've been talking about?
Well, it creates more opportunities for face-to-face interaction. Remember that whole social deprivation thing we discussed?
Right, right.
So a phone-free school would encourage kids to connect with each other in real life, building those social skills and emotional bonds that are so important for well-being.
It's like a mandatory digital detox.
Haha, exactly.
Okay, so more recess, more free play, and even a bit of calculated risk-taking. I like it.
And he actually highlights the success of this program called the Let Grow Project, which is all about encouraging kids to take on age-appropriate challenges and responsibilities.
The Let Grow Project. What's that all about?
It's this really cool homework assignment, but it's not your typical one. Kids, with their parents' help, have to do something they've never done on their own before.
Okay, give me some examples. Like, what kinds of things are we talking about?
It could be walking the dog, cooking a meal, running an errand, anything that pushes them a little outside their comfort zone and helps them feel more independent.
I love that. It's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful.
It is, and it's been incredibly successful. Kids say they feel more confident, more competent, more connected to their community.
It's amazing what happens when we give kids a little trust, right?
It really is, and Haidt sees this kind of playful, exploratory approach as especially important for boys.
Oh, why is that?
Well, because they're the ones who are, more likely to withdraw from the real world and spend all their time online. So this is a way to get them engaged, get them out there experiencing life.
Okay, so we've talked about the role of governments, the role of schools, but let's be real. A lot of this comes down to us, the parents. Like, what can we do at home to counteract all of this?
Haidt gives a ton of great advice for parents in the book. He really emphasizes the importance of being intentional and setting clear boundaries around technology use.
I think a lot of parents feel really overwhelmed by this, right? Like, technology is everywhere. It feels almost impossible to, like, set limits and create healthy habits.
You're definitely not alone. It's a challenge for sure. But one of the most important things he suggests is delaying smartphone ownership for as long as possible.
I can already hear the groans from every teenager listening to this, but why is that so important?
Because remember those sensitive periods we talked about earlier? The longer we can keep kids from being fully immersed in the digital world, the more time their brains have to develop those essential social, emotional, cognitive skills in the real world.
Right, right. It's like giving their brains a fighting chance.
Exactly. And then once kids do have smartphones and social media, it's all about setting clear limits and expectations.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? Like, what are some specific things parents can do?
Well, he recommends things like having tech-free zones in the house, setting screen time limits, having family dinners without devices.
Oh, the classic no phones at the dinner table rule.
Exactly. It's about creating spaces and times where real-life connection and conversation can happen.
Yeah, and remembering that we as parents are modeling these behaviors for our kids. Like if we're constantly on our phones, checking emails during dinner, scrolling social media before bed, we're not exactly setting a great example.
That's a really good point. Kids are very good at calling us out on our hypocrisy.
Oh yeah, they'll definitely let you know if you're not practicing what you preach.
Haha, exactly. So it's about setting a good example, being intentional about our own technology use, and creating a home environment that prioritizes face-to-face interaction, play, exploration.
So it's not just about the kids, it's about the whole family.
Exactly.
Okay, so delay smartphones, set limits, create tech-free zones, be mindful of our own tech use. Got it. Anything else parents can do? Like, is there anything we can do to help foster those spiritual practices that Haidt talks about?
Oh, yeah. He's a big advocate for fostering a sense of awe and wonder in kids. He suggests, spending time in nature, encouraging them to be creative, exposing them to inspiring stories and experiences.
It's about nurturing their natural curiosity, reminding them that there's a whole world out there beyond their screens.
Exactly. And it's also about finding opportunities for what he calls self-transcendence.
Self-transcendence, what does that mean?
It's about those moments where kids connect to something bigger than themselves, whether it's through volunteering or being part of a religious or spiritual tradition, or even just appreciating a beautiful sunset.
Helping them find a sense of purpose, meaning beyond their own immediate wants and needs.
Exactly. And lastly, it's about teaching them to be slow to anger and quick to forgive.
I feel like that's a tough one these days. It seems like everyone's so easily offended. How do you teach kids to be more compassionate and forgiving in a world that often feels so judgmental?
It starts with us, right? When we demonstrate empathy and understanding and forgiveness, even when it's hard, we're showing our kids how to do it too.
So leading by example, creating a more compassionate and forgiving environment at home.
Exactly. And it's about teaching them to be critical thinkers, to recognize the difference between healthy debate and toxic negativity, to navigate the online world with awareness and a healthy dose of skepticism.
It seems like a lot of this boils down to finding balance, right? It's not about demonizing technology or, throwing away our phones altogether. It's about using technology in a way that enhances our lives, not takes over.
I completely agree. It's about remembering that the digital world is just one part of our lives. We need to make sure we're also nurturing all those other things, the human connections, experiences, and practices that bring us joy and that foster well-being and give our lives meaning.
Okay, so we've covered government regulations, phone-free schools, the Let Grow project, tips for parents. There's one big piece missing from this puzzle, though, right? What about the tech companies themselves? Like, they have a huge role to play in all of this.
Ah, yes. The elephant in the room, and Haidt does acknowledge that they have a responsibility to design their platforms with user well-being in mind, especially when it comes to children.
But isn't that a bit like asking the fox to guard the henhouse? I mean, these companies make money by keeping us glued to our screens. So how can we expect them to, actually prioritize our well-being?
It's a valid concern, but Haidt believes that change is possible, especially as more people become aware of the problem and governments start, taking action. And there are some promising initiatives out there, like the Center for Humane Technology.
Oh, I've heard of them. What do they do?
They're basically pushing for more ethical design practices, practices that prioritize human well-being over those addictive algorithms.
So there are people within the tech industry who are, recognizing the problem and trying to create more humane technology.
Yes, absolutely. And Haidt also emphasizes the power of consumer pressure. When we demand change, companies tend to listen.
It's about voting with our wallets, supporting companies that are creating technology that aligns with our values.
Exactly. And being informed consumers, educating ourselves about the potential harms of technology, setting boundaries for ourselves and our families, and advocating for change. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
You're right. We can't just sit around and wait for the tech companies or the government to fix this for us.
We all have a role to play.
Okay, so this is a lot to digest. It's a complex issue, and it's going to take a lot of work to create a healthier relationship with technology.
I agree. It's not going to be easy, but as we've discussed, the stakes are incredibly high.
It's not just about, limiting screen time. It's about, reclaiming our humanity, strengthening our connections.
Well said.
Making sure technology works for us, not the other way around.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now.
Okay, so we've explored the problem, we've discussed some potential solutions, but the real question is what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to create a healthier, more balanced life for yourself and your family in this digital age? We'll be back soon for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore Haidt's conclusion and the hopeful vision he offers for the future. Don't miss it. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the anxious generation. We've talked about the problem, brainstormed solutions, really dug into all of this. But I'm curious, like, what's Haidt's overall takeaway? What does he want us to walk away with?
Well, I think his conclusion is both a reality check and a call to action. He compares this whole mental health crisis to a canary in a coal mine. Like it's a warning sign that something's seriously wrong.
It's like we've created this system, this Mars, that's churning out a generation struggling with anxiety, loneliness, lack of purpose.
Yeah, exactly. But he doesn't think we're doomed. He believes we can, turn things around.
Okay, so there's hope.
Yeah, but it takes acknowledging the problem, and owning our part in it and working together to build a better environment for kids.
Okay, so it's not a hopeless situation, but it's definitely not going to be easy.
Right. It requires a collective effort. We have to be willing to, challenge the status quo, to really put the well-being of young people ahead of, convenience and profit.
Put our money where our mouth is, so to speak.
Exactly. And he sees this as a moral obligation, like a call to action for everyone. Parents, teachers, policymakers, tech innovators, anyone who cares about the future.
And he actually uses this really interesting analogy. He compares this situation to that classic bystander effect experiment, the one where researchers pump smoke into a room.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that one.
And people were more likely to report the smoke if they were alone, but if there were other people in the room, they'd just kind of look around, assuming someone else would do something.
Right. And as a result, no one took action. So is he saying we're all just like standing around watching the smoke fill the room, but hoping someone else will, sound the alarm?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's saying. Like, we see the problem, we know something's wrong, but we hesitate to act because we think, oh, well, someone else will fix it.
And his message is, don't be a bystander. Be the one who speaks up, who takes action, who demands change.
Be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Exactly.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to create a better future for our kids, for ourselves, for everyone.
And he doesn't just point out the problem. He offers a roadmap for change, too. With specific steps we can take individually and as a society to reverse these trends.
So it's not about ditching technology entirely. It's about, using it wisely, mindfully, understanding how it affects us and our children.
Right. And it's about rediscovering those core human values, connection, play, creativity, awe, purpose, meaning, all those things that are so essential for well-being.
Especially in this digital age where it's so easy to get caught up in all the noise and distraction.
Exactly.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little empowering.
Yeah, we hope it gives you some things to think about, some things to talk about with your friends and family.
And maybe even some concrete steps you can take to create a healthier relationship with technology.
In your own life and in the world around you.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to get you thinking.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning.
Keep diving deep.